Okay. So let's kind of start with the what so that we can get everybody on the same page. So, and for you, what is negotiated learning, or how would you sum it up in a nutshell?
Um, well, to talk about it in a very basic way,
Hmm.
negotiated syllabus or negotiated learning is where
Mm,
the students decide what they want to learn. So in
mm,
its very pure form, then you go into the classroom and you say, okay, what do you want to learn today? And actually, when I first started taking Japanese lessons,
mm.
the whole course was negotiated in the sense of I went into a classroom and the teacher said, what do you want to learn?
Right.
And my answer was Japanese.
Right.
And,
Sure.
and that's the problem with negotiated learning,
Right.
which I'll talk about later. So, in the pure form, it's students deciding what they want to learn
Mm,
and the material they'll use. It could be the methodology, the
mm-hmm.
groupings. It's very pure form.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How about for you?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's kind of basically very similar. I would say that consciously I started off by thinking about the syllabus and,
Mm.
thinking about students' needs and wants, what are their goals. Um, Sometimes we need to balance that against any kind of school or institution aims and objectives, um, and then what materials are available to us. Um, I see kind of curriculum as being a bit bigger than syllabus. This is kind of
Yes,
from the
yes,
British perspective, right?
yes.
So syllabus being topics, language, skills, etc. But curriculum can include materials, the methodology or approach, as you said, homework and assessment. And one other thing that I became conscious of that I think a lot of people do negotiate anyway is the other aspects, like, how do you use classroom space, or what
Yeah.
kind of groupings? You mentioned pairs, or whether students work individually and who they work with, where they sit. So they're all part
Mm.
of negotiating the overall process. So
Exactly,
that's
yes.
basically the what for me.
And also sequencing. It,
Yes. Yeah.
yes,
When people
uh,
want to do things or in what order.
yes,
Right.
exactly.
So
But
then,
in the pure sense, sorry, in the pure sense, there would be no sequencing because there would be nothing. It's totally negotiated. So the sequencing would come as an act of the negotiation every lesson in its totally
right.
pure sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then the students will then decide the sequencing together or change it as they go along, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. I mean, going back to my Japanese experience, where what do you want to learn? Japanese. Well, can you narrow that
Mm.
down? And then me saying, well, I need to know how to do this on a daily basis. And then it comes from my needs.
Right.
And then that
Definitely.
evolves in a pure sense, the syllabus is something that should be written after the learning event at the end in a
Right.
negotiated syllabus.
Yeah, so for example, when I started learning Malay, first of all, I was
Mm.
trying to learn Malay, casual conversation, just to kind of speak with friends and some friends of friends. But then once I was getting married, suddenly it was like, okay, I need to learn the language I need to get married. So
Exactly.
we kind of,
Yeah.
that was the shift in sequence.
I mean, language learning is driven by need. I mean, my first Japanese word was nomi hodai, which was drink as much as you like, and that was just I need to relax after work, and then you go from there to ordering food and so we're lucky because we're living in the foreign country, so we have specific needs immediately.
Right. Yeah, similar to like ESL for your
Yeah,
JSL, Japanese
exactly.
as a second
Yeah,
language. Just going
yeah,
to give a couple
exactly.
of shouts out. Hi, John, for coming in, and Lenny, and also Steve and Barb have joined us as well. It's fantastic to see you as well.
Hi,
Um,
everybody.
so we've just kind of summed up what negotiated learning is, and that it takes place mostly between students and teachers, maybe also institutions and possibly parents, I guess. Um,
Mm.
why do it? So that's kind of like often the big question for a lot of people is like, why should we negotiate?
Okay, you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, for sure. You can kickstart, or I can
Uh,
kickstart, whichever.
in my book chapter on negotiated syllabus, so the one that you
Mm,
mentioned in promo, I talked about three contexts where I have used aspects of negotiation. And the
mm,
first one, I used to work many, many years ago for a business English company. And basically, they would put a group of students together for a 10-week session of 2 hours.
mm-hmm,
Now, all of the students are from different companies.
mm.
They all have different needs. So the very
Interesting.
nature of that is that it has to be negotiated. It's a 10-week course, you
Mm,
know, and the company wanted me to do it. The first class had to be a needs analysis class.
mm,
So that's the first time where, through necessity, I had to negotiate the syllabus.
mm,
Similarly to that, at my university, we have extension center courses where people from the community will come in on a
mm-hmm,
voluntary basis for a period of time. Very,
mm,
very similar in the respect of the first lesson has to be a needs analysis because when I'm going into that extension center course, I have the only information I have is the student's name, and
mm-hmm.
that's it.
Right.
So I have no information whatsoever. So yeah. And then the third aspect, which I'll talk about maybe later, which is more difficult to negotiate,
Mm,
is my current context, which is working at a university, and that is very
mm,
difficult to negotiate because
mm,
we have to write a syllabus ahead of time. So, for example, my syllabuses are due in January, and I meet the
right.
students in April.
In
So,
April,
in my
right?
paper, in the chapter, I talk about it being an educated guess. However,
Mm,
there are aspects that you can negotiate, which we'll get
yes.
to. Okay, over to you, sir.
All right. Um, yeah, I guess kind of like yourself, sometimes it's from the need of like just because we don't have enough, what do we need to know kind of thing. We have to start there. Um, for me, I was very lucky actually. The first time where kind of having a negotiated syllabus crystallized was when I was a volunteer English teacher on Peace Boat.
Yeah.
And actually, in their mandate, they actively encourage all of the teachers to negotiate the syllabus with their learners.
Mm.
And I was at the time I was doing my master's in TEFL TESOL, and I thought, wow, how lucky am I? I've got a chance to put everything I've been learning into practice and draw on the
Oh, maybe
experiences
the
that I've
storm has
had.
come in for Phil. He's just.
And
Are you still there? Yeah.
yeah, uh, and then I was able, from in Peace Boat context, to be able to negotiate the syllabus basically as much as I wanted to or could with the students there. So, and we had a reasonable amount of background information, and we kind of level placed them through interviews and kind of a written assessment, and so on. But there it very much was about kind of the philosophy of the teaching program was about choice and kind of underlying democratic principles and this negotiated idea of
Mm.
between learners and so forth. Um,
Right.
for anyone else who's just trying to come in or have friends trying to come in, please help them by sharing this event on your page. Then people may get a link to come in live. I just saw a message from Yitza. Sorry, she was wondering how to get in here. Um, so they just need to come to the ITDI page.
Mm.
Going back to the why a little bit more. One is about choice. Another one is kind of this idea of equity or equality and respect for students, especially when you're dealing with adult learners or older learners. And that I see it as inherently more motivating for my students. Like I'd never seen students so motivated to learn what they wanted to learn as I have in contexts where I've been able to negotiate the process. So that's a big why for me. Um, and in the work situation, like yourself, teaching business classes and very similar situation, going in not knowing much about students, then negotiation is an important business skill anyway. So I think we can always justify the time that it takes at the beginning of a course to negotiate because they're developing useful skills, and arguably they're kind of life skills anyway.
Yeah.
And lastly, on I think the hot topic these days, often spoken about in ELT in Malaysia, is about incorporating the 4 Cs for 21st century learning. So communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking skills.
Mm.
Negotiated learning presents an opportunity for enhanced communication, collaboration, creativity in designing curriculum, and also critical thinking skills, thinking about what works, what doesn't work. So,
and also it may foster autonomy in sense of,
yes.
you're responsible for your learning, and so maybe it encourages you to go on and self-study. And a lot of the research talks about the effects on motivation. And I mean, from an anecdotal point of view, I remember at high school, I hated all of my classes with passion, apart from history. And one time this teacher came in, and I always remember he put these like little tasks at the front of the classroom on these cards, and you could go up and choose what you wanted to do for the lesson. It was my favorite lesson of my whole high school experience, and that was totally negotiated.
So he gave you that choice in your classroom from there.
Yeah.
Right. And so we got a question from Steve, who's talked about, he mentioned that he advocated a retrospective syllabus with junior high school teachers. And he asked also about is negotiated learning level dependent. And I guess tied up in with that, I had a student from doing a BA TESOL also asked about, is it age dependent? So either we can touch on that now, or we can come back to it later.
Well, let's touch on that now.
For sure.
One of the big problems I found in the first paper I wrote on this, which was called "Tell Me What You Want, What You Really, Really Want," was not a question of level with the business students, but a question of not knowing what they want. So I'm going into these business classes saying, okay, over the next 9 weeks of 2 hours, what would you like to study? Unlike my Japanese experience, where I just went, I want to study Japanese, you'll often find that the students have these vague goals, like, well, I want to learn English. Well, we can't possibly learn the whole of the English language in 9 weeks. So that's one issue. And the second issue is having the language available to be able to communicate the need. Because obviously we're teaching English. I need my students to communicate their needs back in English. My Japanese isn't good enough. So then it does become somewhat level dependent. Although there are aspects of negotiation that you could do even with young learners, I would say.
Right.
One of the activities that I do is called discussion corners. And 4 corners of the room, and if you want to talk about this topic, go here. If you want to talk about this topic, go here. And this is an aspect of a task that is negotiated. Now you could do that with young learners. If you want to go to the green corner or the blue corner or the purple corner or the orange corner, I don't think it's age dependent or level dependent. I think there are aspects that can be brought in. Would you like to read this storybook or this storybook?
Yes. Yeah, there's a very good video just on Edutopia, and it was kind of similar to a lot of extensive reading principles, but again, it was about the importance of giving children the choice in what they read. So it fits in nicely with that example. When you talked about those corners and the language as well. So, for example, with very low levels, then I've sometimes scaffolded, for example, talking about giving them some of the stock phrases to negotiate. I want to do this because. And so that's also worked as well. Hi, Nina, Yitzer, and Stanley. Thank you for joining us. Then age-wise as well, I was stumped initially at first by the question about young learners, and I thought back about kindergarten, and I find, for example, I would negotiate certain aspects with them. Like, for example, after they'd learned like the hello song, then I might ask them, okay, this week, you know the hello song, how do you want to sing it? Do you want to sing the happy hello song, the sad hello song, or the grumpy hello song? And it was interesting to see they would kind of take different votes, and one class would almost always choose the happy hello song, and the other one would always choose the grumpy hello song because they just want to see me pretending to be grumpy. So that kind of involvement and interaction with them is kind of, it's not fully negotiated, but I think it's a good way to start introducing choice and the idea of learning process being negotiated.
Exactly, it's an aspect of negotiation, and something as simple as, I like this task. We talk about one aspect of needs analysis is learning preferences.
Right.
Now, I have a very negative experience of how I was taught French at high school,
Mm.
and affected my language learning. It scarred me for life, and I don't like
Right.
it.
Right.
But there are aspects that I like of education. So if someone's trying to get my need, I would say, well, I much prefer this. Now, for
Mm.
young learners, at the end of a lesson, yeah, I'm sure they're able to communicate, a point to a smiley face or an unhappy face about certain tasks that you
Mm.
did, so that you know for next time that okay, they like this task,
Right.
and in that sense that they're communicating choice, which is an
Yes.
aspect of negotiation.
Yeah, I saw a needs analysis that was adapted to young learners, and they asked
Right.
some quite simple questions, and basically learners would basically color a smiley face, a straight line face, or an unhappy face about whether they liked reading, listening, speaking, writing, and what kind of activities they liked as well. So that enabled the teacher to think about how they approach their lesson. So it's
Yeah.
taking students' preferences into and negotiating that way, even if not always directly.
Right.
Um, so I kind of wish, as let's shift a little with moving into kind of the how do we negotiate. Um,
Mm.
Number one, you kind of really talk about starting with a needs analysis, and
Yes.
um, I think sometimes we can do that before the course starts if we have enough information, but a lot of the time the reality is we do it at the beginning of the course.
Right.
I actually find also that it's good to do at the beginning of the course because it gives students a common goal to work towards. So I find it
Mm.
beneficial for a lot of team building and building up
Yes.
that collaboration and trust in a classroom. But so hand in hand, then maybe my stage one and stage two of the process is needs analysis and setting that classroom context where it's supportive and safe and that real ideal learning environment. Would you say it's similar for yourself? And
Yeah.
what
I
do you
mean,
think makes it work?
if I go back to the business classes and the links that I've put to these three ideas,
Mm.
going back to the business classes, I used to teach the 10-week classes, and the first one was a needs analysis. As
Mm.
you say, it's a team building activity. You make the needs analysis communicative. They
Yes.
interview one another. What I did in my original research paper, I modified the existing needs analysis
Mm-hmm.
form, because I thought it needed adapting, it needed more information to include questions like learning preferences from previous experience. What did you like about learning English from your previous experience? What didn't you like?
Mm.
And so on. And going back to that question of students not knowing what they wanted to study,
Mm.
what I did was create what's called a pick and choose sheet. Now,
Okay.
this came from the idea of England, where we have, you go to the sweet shop or the candy store for American English, and we
Mm.
have the pick and mix. So you go and you have an array of different candy, and okay, I'm going to take and pick and mix, and then weigh it and pay a lot of money. But um, I had this idea of, what if I made a list of all of the business classes that I've prepared already. For example,
Mm.
telephone, emailing, chairing a meeting, presenting, and I'll put them on a piece of paper. So it gives
Mm.
students, business students particularly, the chance to look at opportunities for classes. And then they would decide, is this very useful for them?
Mm.
Useful or not useful? And they have like a
Mm.
free choice on the multiple choice. From there, after they've
Mm.
gone through the sheet, they can start to negotiate. And then
Mm.
I would pass each student 5 pieces of paper, and I would
Mm-hmm.
say, I want you to write a topic that you would like to study in the next 10
Mm-hmm.
weeks. Then we put them all together and look for similarities. And then I built the course from these bits of paper, spread them all over the room, all over the
Mm-hmm.
table, and then look for what, okay, so everyone's interested in meeting, and we're going to do meeting. And then if something is somewhat ambiguous, I think in my
Mm.
paper I talk about a student going, I want to learn social communication.
Right.
Well, because you're doing an online needs analysis, and when I say online, it's live, you're with the
Right.
students,
Mm-hmm.
you can then ask them, well, okay, you've mentioned social communication, what exactly do you mean?
Yes.
And the student said, well, actually, I'd like to talk about the news. And
Mm.
then you push, what kind of news? Well, sometimes I meet clients at the airport and I've got a small talk with them and I want to be able to talk about current news. Okay, great. Now we can have a lesson about, you know, so and build that lesson. So that's what I did. But needs are often changing. So in this 10-week course that I used to teach, I used to build what's called the feedback sheet. And the feedback sheet was given in week 3 and week 7. And it can be emailed to me as a teacher. And it gives the students chance to modify the syllabus. So I will set a syllabus after the first needs analysis of the next 9 lessons. But they can give me feedback after week 3 and week 7 to change it if they want to, or to change my learning methods, or how much homework they do, you know, different aspects of the course, so that it then needs to become an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And like, you know, you can come up with your initial syllabus.
Yeah.
But as I also reminded my students when I was on Peace and doing this the first time, was that I included a statement actually there to say this is renegotiable.
Yes.
Because we were on a ship traveling around the world and we weren't entirely sure what our needs would be as we got to different ports, different locations, and we got new information. So, for example, as we headed towards Sri Lanka, then it occurred to us that, oh yeah, there's going to be bargaining. So my students would say, yeah, can we learn how to bargain in a marketplace? So then that became an immediate need. So I think it's quite useful to also get students, like you did before, you rated what's useful. And there's also, you know, the matrix for looking at what is useful and urgent, or important and urgent, so they can kind of set up, you know, something is useful and it's or it's useful and important and it's urgent, or it's important but it's not urgent, and they can look at kind of those dynamics to help them to establish their priorities. And then, of course, kind of looking at calendars. So, for example, it's quite helpful sometimes teachers, they look at, you know, the year and events taking place, and they might see, oh yeah, there's Halloween coming up, so that may influence what kind of things you do in the lead up to Halloween. Steve's got a point here. He's asking, he said, he's curious about the effectiveness of formal negotiated syllabus versus a negotiated approach that teachers in many contexts use. And so I think, touching back earlier, we do, but I think a lot of teachers naturally do negotiate different things. You know, do you need more time? Would you like to do this or this?
Yes.
I think partly it's maybe for me, I think it's a mindset, as opposed to kind of, before I was doing this consciously, I was doing some things unconsciously, but not necessarily consistently or methodically. And I feel that it's more effective, and I consider more aspects of the curriculum that can be negotiated by doing it in kind of a more formal process. At least in my mind, anyway. How about you?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm just looking at Steve's comment about cultural differences as well. Because that's also interesting, because in my research, I mentioned this because I asked the students what they felt, university students, what they felt about negotiated syllabus. And I had a graduate student interview them in Japanese so they would get the real answer rather than me interviewing them, where I'm the teacher. I had a student interview them. And you really did have a diverse reply from the students in the respect of, some students were very interested in negotiating and some weren't. And you get the idea, especially in Japan, the idea of sensei. I mean, why am I negotiating with you? You're the teacher. You're supposed to teach me.
Yeah.
You know,
you're supposed to tell me and know what I need to do.
You're supposed to tell me what I'm supposed to learn. And you know, I mean, going back to my Japanese lesson, when I went in and the teacher said, "What do you want to study?" I just looked at her and went, "But you're the teacher." So I think there might be that sense of, why are you asking me?
Yeah, it's interesting because in actually teaching business students in Japan, this same kind of issue came up when the company that was sending me, they said, "Oh, which textbook do you want to use?" And I said, "Well, I don't know yet. I haven't met the students." And this was after my Peacebo experience with negotiating curriculum and syllabus. So I kind of explained to them how I was going to approach it, and they were like, "Okay, but we need to be able to tell the students." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me what textbooks you have, and I'll take all of them." and then we will basically we'll look at them, find out their needs. And we ended up looking at their needs, and I think earlier by you having that pick and choose or pick and mix, or having some kind of a menu, that does show that you're prepared, you've thought about what the options are, and you help your students, you scaffold it basically in terms of giving them options that may seem relevant, and then they can add their own and get ideas once they see what's available.
And
So I think that
for teachers' sanity as well, because I was a busy teacher. I'm preparing my own material for a negotiated class. If I get the textbook, it's easier, isn't it? Because the material, some of the materials there, I might supplement it. But if I'm creating this course completely negotiated, it's still work. So the idea with the pick and choose sheet was to give students the idea of what they could possibly learn based on lessons I've already prepared. And then if they wanted something that was different, I then built. So eventually I was building this bank of business lessons that I could do. And I think the idea with the material is to build in as much negotiation within the material as possible, so it's not so fixed. So it's always bringing the students in. So for example, if you're going to do business telephone English, rather than say, okay, you work for a trading company and I work for, don't say that. Get the students to create the role play.
Right. Yes.
Based on their work, So rather, I was teaching a business class today, and the textbook was like, okay, I'm a buyer, and I work for a Turkish rug company, and it was like, well, rather than do that, get the students to create the role play. So you've got that flexibility within the material, and then the whole thing becomes negotiated. Sorry if I'm going off on tangents.
No, I think that's really valid. Actually, that was my first trainer that I had ever when I was teaching in Japan, back in 2001. And that's what he advocated as well. And he said also from the point of view of, it gets your student in situation and in character, and it makes it more real because they've chosen it themselves. So
so something as simple as drawing a stick person on the board, because I'm a terrible drawer, and go, who is this? Who is this? Where are they? So say you're doing a class on starting conversations in a social situation. Okay, who is this and who is this and where are they? And how will they start the conversation? Now go, So it's all co-constructed. And that is an aspect of negotiation.
Yeah, so I think it's that mindset, instead of any time that we could give the information to students, is there an opportunity to ask and let the students provide that? Okay, so we kind of we looked at kind of at the beginning, we're looking at needs analysis, and we're thinking about creating that ideal learning environment. And for me, actually, that also includes asking students to get them to think about how they want to use the wall space or how they want to arrange their seating and so on. So they're negotiating that environment. And I think that gives them ownership over their classroom as well as the syllabus. Earlier we talked about goal sharing and those needs and wants. And actually I borrowed from you, you did work on instant messenger for cooperative development following, was it Julian Edge's work? So I found that was a really good kind of process to adapt into the goal sharing stage, where people were initially sharing their goals, and by having a listener who, what's the role? Sorry, remind me.
Understander.
The understander role. Then that allowed the person sharing their goals to talk and develop their goals without them kind of being cut off and so on. So would you like to kind of just sum that up a little bit, what you did with cooperative development?
Were they doing that in their own language, or were they doing that in English?
Actually, my students, they did it in English because they could do it in English.
That's right. But it doesn't need to be. It could be in the student's own language.
Yes, especially because they're talking about their needs and so on, and that may be more beneficial with lower level learners.
Well, basically, the understander would listen and then summarize the thoughts of whoever is speaking. So if I'm talking about my learning goals, I'm not going to suggest or advise or hijack the conversation. I'm just going to listen and then reflect about what you're saying. So through that process, maybe you are able to identify needs that you didn't know you had, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like by giving people that kind of chance to have the conversation just focused on them and have an understander, the listener, asking them questions to clarify some things, or they feedback positively about things that are interesting, tell me more about that, then sometimes that helps to go from those kind of vague goals of like, oh yeah, I want to be fluent in English, or I want to be able to listen to movies, to them being kind of a bit more specific, oh well, what kind of English or what kind of movies, in what situations? And then it becomes easier for us to, as teachers, to then be able to find appropriate material to focus on more specific stuff.
It does need scaffolding, though, if you're going to do that, in terms of giving the students the know-how of what is available or what can be done in the classroom. So for example, listening skills or reading skills or fluency. What do you want to focus on exactly?
So one question I had as well in previous contests was, well, what if you have to use a textbook? And I've been in some classes where I do have to use a textbook.
Well, that's
and
fine.
one way around it was I asked my students, I said, okay, there are 12 chapters in this book. This is kind of your week 1 assignment. This is with university. We got 15 weeks. So take a look at these chapters and decide which are the ones that you really want to do, and are there any that you definitely don't want to do or you think are a waste of time. And after they came back and did that, we found that basically there were 3 that they thought were a waste of time, including one was on introductions. We kind of modified it. And then there was another one, and they were just like, yeah, we've done shopping so many times. So, and then we talked about what else would they like to do. And that class, in the end, they couldn't decide it early on in the term, but towards the end, they decided that they wanted to make games in English. And so they did we did some project-based work, and they made their own games to teach each other and then later play in class over a 3-4 week period.
I mean, yeah, I used
so you can modify part.
Yeah, I used to
so
use
I think
but yeah. So carry on.
So I was just thinking, there are there's that spectrum of negotiating aspects of curriculum, or not necessarily the full curriculum, depending upon what your context allows. I have another question for you as well. When you get into the kind of the evaluation or the renegotiation, you said you used kind of some feedback forms that students can email to you.
Yes, that's right.
I wondered why did you choose that as a way for them to communicate with you as opposed to kind of renegotiating in class?
Because I did this in the business class, and of course time is money. They're paying a lot of money to the company for me to teach them. So if I'm going to do needs analysis ongoing, and like every class becomes, like a needs analysis, it becomes kind of like Nova-esque, if you like, where every class is like, hi, nice to meet you. I didn't want it to be like that. We're going to do needs analysis for lesson 1, but you will have 9 classes. So the feedback on their changing needs could be done through a channel of communication with me as the teacher outside of class. And the reason I chose email was, I mean, this was probably about 15 years ago when I taught this business class. So, I mean, it was before the social network. Now I would have students I'd have a Facebook group for the students or a line group, and they could communicate with me through that.
Right, with WhatsApp and so on.
Yeah, so having that channel of communication where the syllabus can become flexible is very important, I think. But at a university, you can't do that because I feel I can't do that, and I don't want to do that because I've written a syllabus, and I often say to my students in lesson 1, please look at the syllabus because I'm going to follow this. But then you can, if you're going to deviate from the syllabus in any way, you should communicate to the students. And there's no reason why. Sometimes I'll say, okay, we've got the following lessons to do. Would you like to have the final test in December? And then in January, we'll do this class based on another topic. Or, you know, so sometimes I negotiate the sequence with the students based on how what they wish. Do they want to get the exam over and done with before the Christmas holiday, or do they want to wait and study over the vacation time? So even though you have a set syllabus, you can negotiate the sequence.
Yeah,
but
I think that's. Pardon me? Sorry, I just missed that.
That discussion is done in class with the students.
Right. Yeah, I think for me as well, I've done things, for example, where we negotiate the first 5 or 10, and then we kind of revisit it after a certain period of time, because you can't continually do so. Steve's got a good point here, talking about the negotiated approach requiring a certain level of trust between teachers and students, as well as between students themselves. But he also points out that this approach engenders trust from the beginning of the process, because as a teacher, you know, you're entrusting that to your students. And there was a question the other day too, was, you know, that I was asked, is there any group of students that I wouldn't negotiate with? I thought it was a really good question. Actually, the first thing that came to mind was some classes of high school boys that I've taught when they're around 15, 16, where I negotiate parts of it, but, you know, actually within the same year group, it may shift from class to class just because of the overall maturity level in a class, or the way that they kind of demonstrate they have responsibility or not. So, yeah, there are areas that you may have to modify your approach for.
Exactly. And student, you also got to remember, when you know, don't blindly go in, oh, negotiated syllabus or negotiated learning is what I must do from tomorrow, or tomorrow's Sunday, from Monday, because students might not want it. And in my chapter, in my research, as I said, some of the students didn't want it. The university students want to come in and do the class that the teacher has prepared for them. In terms of, well, I've signed up for this course based on the syllabus, especially if it's an elective, you know, I may have read the syllabus or not, depending on the student. And, you know, why are you suddenly riffing this? Because I chose this because I wanted to study this.
Yeah, so, now you're not giving me what I thought I was getting. Right?
Yeah. So you do have to be very careful. I think Steve's put a question about following the syllabus. So I feel if I write the syllabus, I'm going to follow that syllabus. But as I said about the material, I will build in aspects of negotiation in the lesson. So as I mentioned about, what did I say before, about the role play, for example, co-constructing the role play, or aspects of homework could be negotiated, deadlines could be negotiated. So even though I might follow the syllabus, I do building a lot of negotiation. And you mentioned projects. I also do a lot of projects, which the students have the freedom then to decide what they will do their project on within certain parameters. And that parameter might be the textbook. So you mentioned about different units in the textbook. You know, you might put students into groups. You might have them negotiate, do they want to do a pair project or an individual project, which I've done in the past. And I've said, if you're going to do a pair project, your presentation will be 10 minutes. But if you do an individual one, your presentation will be 5 minutes. I'm going to go out of the room, and when I come back on the chalkboard, if you are doing a pair presentation, put the name of your partner on the left side, and if you're doing an individual, put your name on the right. I don't mind which you choose. I go out of the room for 3 minutes, come back in, the names are all there, they've negotiated, I've taken myself out of their space so they can do it without me in there, because they might think they have to choose a certain way. And then they've negotiated it. And then they have the freedom then to negotiate, I want to work by myself.
Mm.
or I want to work with a partner, and this is my partner. I've chosen my partner. So there are all kinds of little bits of aspects of a set syllabus that you can negotiate.
Yeah, and then you've made, for example, where you talked about the presentation length, adjusting the presentation length for individual versus
Yeah.
pairs. Then obviously you've maintained that sense of fairness,
Yes.
and that's kind of tied into trust as well.
Mm.
There's some really good comments coming in that just kind of recap a little bit. Shiki also talking about the importance of trust and rapport. And I think a lot of that, you set the tone from the beginning and getting students talking about the ideal learning environment and team building and so on. So I kind of see that as that's the soil, right, for making
Yes.
everything happen. And as Steve's often talked about as well, the importance of, getting the class with you right at the beginning of the year, before trying to kind of get into textbooks and the kind of the nuts and bolts.
I mean, if you go back to, the reason I became a teacher was because of Dead Poets Society. And if you remember,
Right, yeah.
into that
Captain, my captain.
He goes, everybody get up, and he takes them out and does this, look at the photographs, and that sets the tone of his class right off the bat. And, if you start to negotiate aspects, like in my business seminar, I just had the first class last week. I get them to list famous companies on the board, and then what do you know about this company? And then I put them in a team which is random. I don't get them to choose. I just randomly choose it. But then they can decide, okay, choose a company on the board. Which company are you going to be for the semester? Which company are you going to work for? And then you're going to use that company in role plays. You're going to use that company to do homework on and research on. But you're choosing the company in your group, and that will be your company. So I think we've got Apple, we've got Toyota, we've got McDonald's. So then they will interact. All of the business role plays will be based on their company, and their first homework was to research a little bit about the company. They're negotiating that right off the bat. I'm not giving them a company or telling them what to do. They're choosing.
One question that came to me, actually from talking about democracy in general, but how to avoid the tyranny of the majority. So, for example, I had my 3 choices of what I wanted to study, and none of them got voted for.
Right.
And I accept that I'm in the minority, but I may feel a bit gutted that I didn't get my choices. So one thing that I think I could do next time to improve the process is once we kind of reach our almost finalized negotiated syllabus, is to go back and make sure that everybody has something in there and that nobody gets left out. So maybe that's kind of one extra catch.
That was the beauty of the business classes and the extension center classes. They're small enough, so you can cater for everybody. But if you're trying to negotiate with 30 freshmen first years, then you have to cater for the majority, because but going back to my presentation idea, I can cater for those who don't want to work with a partner because it might be troublesome to meet their partner outside of school to work on the project, or those who really do want to work with a buddy. So that caters for every need, I think.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing is that some people may say, I prefer to work in pairs, or I don't like speaking in front of other people. They want to change the dynamics and so on. And sometimes I do make clear to everybody that, you may not do what you want all of the time, but at some point you will do. But everybody will kind of get the experience of doing everything at least once. Right. With bigger classes, so this is another question that came in, was how do you negotiate with bigger classes like 30, for example? So one thing that I've used that I feel worked pretty well is a pyramid decision-making task, and basically that is where we put people initially, they think by themselves and they put down maybe their 3 choices. Then they will talk to a partner, and those 2 have 3 choices each. They talk together, they agree on 3 choices. based upon their reasons and so on. Then there'll be another whole that's taking place across all the pairs. And then in the next level, the two pairs will make a group of 4, and from the 6 choices, then get to 3. And then it keeps going up until we get to the number of decisions that we have time to address. So I think that quite good, and it's a really good fluency speaking activity as well for students in class, and you can see kind of the confidence, the motivation that comes with that, and students just get better at, you know, justifying their opinions and all the kinds of things that they need to do as part of negotiating.
Yeah, it's a good
Feel
point.
free, everyone, to put your questions in the comments below. And evaluation.
Yes.
Earlier you talked about homework choices. How about evaluation? Do you also negotiate the evaluation?
In some of my classes, I mean, I have a negotiated aspect, especially in my seminar class. There is too much in the textbook to do in the class. So I set some of it for homework. But I have 2 levels of homework. I have an optional homework, and you've got to do this homework to get a grade homework. And I call that a portfolio task, which then builds up into a portfolio of work for the students, because it's a business course. So I'm using business language. Now, if the students don't do the optional homework, because I tend to get a little bit upset if my students don't do their homework. If they don't do the optional homework, I try and think, well, I've given them the choice. I think it's a good idea for them to do it, and they've decided not to do it. But those who do the optional homework, I'll check it. But the portfolio task is non-negotiable. You have to do this to pass the course. So I have 2 levels, but that's a negotiation as well. But whether you know, the element of fairness is, you know, when you sign up for a course, right from the beginning, I'm saying this is a criteria to pass the course. This is the work you'll have to do. I don't want to get into negotiating like length of essays, or, you know, whether I can do a test or an exam, or, you know, I don't want to give that choice. Because it would not be fair on everybody. It has to, you know, it has to be fair. But there are elements like the projects. You know what? In my EAP course, the students will choose on projects and give a proposal to me, and I'll guide them with the proposal. But it comes from them.
Yeah.
Now,
so I think
the project is non-negotiable, but the topic is negotiable.
Right. So I think, yeah, everybody kind of has their kind of lines as to what is and isn't negotiable. But I think it's also good to think about consciously, because sometimes we can revisit some of those things and think, well, actually, could I negotiate? And also, to what extent do I want to negotiate it, and what extent is it possible to negotiate? So sometimes I look back when we think about, okay, within the curriculum and learning process, syllabus, materials, the approach, homework, assessment, use of wall space or classroom space, classroom dynamics, then maybe for yourselves as teachers, it's quite helpful to think of those and then think, okay, one, can I negotiate these, and do I want to? And then that will kind of help you look at your course and think, okay, I will take this approach and negotiate these aspects, but are these others?
And I think, I mean, something I mentioned in my chapter again was, no matter how set the syllabus is, the teaching process by its very nature is negotiation, because you're going to go in there and you're going to be testing what works with this group of students, and what works with one group of students won't work with the next. So there's always this implicit negotiation of methodology where, okay, this task works or this task doesn't work, or the students, like, you know, really take to this or they don't like this. And the very nature of teaching is an ongoing negotiation between the teacher and the students, and the students and the student. So
I think that's really crucial as well, and it ties back to one of the reasons why I negotiate and why it ties into motivation and choice, is that if the more restricted a course is and the less that students have choice or can negotiate, I think you get more resistance. I see this more in teens, which is kind of goes with their age group, but you know, it's natural to fight back or push back against being told to do this, 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 and this. Whereas when you start introducing choice and that kind of freedom tied with responsibility, then you kind of help to reduce the conflict and the areas that conflict could occur.
I mean, the very nature. I mean, if I'm going to go into a class, because I'm like this in meetings. I don't know who's watching this, but I'll be very honest. I'm like this in meetings. If I go in and then you ask me to do something, I'm kind of like reluctant because I just want passive. You know, sometimes I just want to be told what to do or just passively sit there. And I think some of the students are going into these classes expecting that the teacher will just lecture and there'll be no negotiation and I'll just sit there and I don't have to do anything for 90 minutes. But if you're going in with that aspect of negotiation, by the very nature, the students have to be actively involved. There's agency. And that is very important for you mentioned the 4 C's, you mentioned critical thinking, creativity. It's all develops there from the aspect of negotiating and getting students to think about the learning experience and you know, and aspects of negotiation begins there.
Yes, definitely. So we coming towards the end, kind of just sum up some of the things we've talked about from what is negotiating and what aspects of the learning process we can negotiate within the curriculum from syllabus materials and so on, mostly between students and themselves, but also students and teachers, importance of trust and rapport. And we both talked about starting with needs analysis and creating that optimal environment or ideal learning environment for a lot of that to take place. You talked also about goal sharing and doing that online or live face-to-face as part of the process early on in a course. We talked about some of the pitfalls, like students not knowing what do I want to learn, where do I start, so giving them a menu to kind of help. One other thing I wanted to kind of mention as well is that I don't actually walk into my classes ever really and say, right, we're going to negotiate the syllabus. I think a lot of my learners, especially when I was in Japan, would just kind of freak out if I said that because it'd be too much. But what I have done is I just take them through the steps, kind of task at a time or lesson at a time, until by the end of the second class, then I say, you know, they've got all the things that they said they wanted to do and they've sequenced them, and then I would hold it up and I say, okay, so this is your syllabus. And then my students have gone, oh, so then you can turn around and say to them, okay, so you've negotiated the syllabus. And I find that's always kind of been much more powerful. So I just wanted to share that as well. Do you have any last words or questions you'd like to ask?
It would be
for the audience
radical.
As well.
It would be wonderfully radical. It would be wonderfully radical to go into the classroom and say, I've got no plan, I've got no syllabus, let's make this together. But yeah, I think we can't do that, especially in university. But there's always aspects that can be negotiated.
And I think also you kind of risk looking incompetent as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. So Andy, you said that you have a couple of links. That's brilliant. I'm very much looking forward to seeing those. We can add them to the Facebook Live recording afterwards. I'll do that. Make sure that any questions weren't missed. Sorry, go on.
The post you said with the 5 minutes, 5 minutes in the ITDI Facebook page.
Okay.
5 minutes before, put them in there.
I will copy them across and also share some other useful links as well. Right. Thank you very much for your time, Andy. It's been a real pleasure as always.
No worries. Just don't tell me the football score because I'm going to go back and watch it. It is on pause. We're 25 minutes in. I don't know the score, so I'm going to just press the pause on and carry on watching it. So.
Brilliant. Thank you for everybody who came. Thank you for your support, your questions and comments. Feel free to add anything afterwards, or if you watch the live at some point later, then You can also comment freely. We also respond to them later on as well. And that's all from us. That's from me and from Andy. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Coming to you from ITDI in Malaysia and Japan.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day. Good night, everyone.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama. Terima kasih. Arigato.